They built a garage that hung over my driveway like it owned the place, and when I pointed it out, they told me it wasn't a big deal. I remember standing there looking up at that roof line cutting into my space and thinking, this is either going to end quietly or it's going to end badly. Turns out it didn't end the way they expected. I'd been living in that house for almost a decade at that point. Out in Cedar Ridge, the kind of neighborhood where people wave even if they don't know your name, where nothing much changes unless somebody paints their mailbox a different color. My place sat on a corner lot. Nothing fancy, but it had one thing I genuinely cared about: a long gravel driveway that ran along the side of the house and stretched all the way back to a detached garage. That driveway was mine. Always had been. The previous owner next door, an older guy named Walt, knew it, respected it, never once tried to push the line. We'd even joked about it once over beers, him saying that strip right there is your kingdom. And in a small way, I suppose it was. Then Walt sold the house. Spring rolled in, and with it came the new neighbors, the Turners. Young couple, mid-30s maybe, 2 kids, a golden retriever that barked at everything. At first they seemed all right, friendly enough, the kind of people who smile a lot but don't really listen. The husband, Greg, shook my hand the first day and said they were excited to make the place theirs. I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone says something like that when they move in. But about 3 weeks later, things started shifting. Trucks pulling up early in the morning, lumber being unloaded, guys in hard hats walking the property line like they were mapping out a battlefield. One afternoon I wandered over, hands in my pockets, just curious. Greg told me they were building a second garage, space for tools, bikes, maybe a small workshop. I nodded and said it sounded fine. But something about where they were pointing didn't sit right. It looked close. Too close. Still, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was just the angle. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Then one morning, about a week later, I backed my SUV out of my driveway, the way I always did, and my side mirror came within an inch of one of their support beams. I hit the brakes and just sat there for a second, heart doing that little jump it does when something almost goes wrong. I got out and looked up. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. The edge of their garage roof wasn't just near my driveway, it was hanging over it, by a lot. Not a couple of inches, not something you could brush off as splitting hairs. It looked like 4, maybe 5 feet of overhang, casting a shadow straight onto my gravel like it belonged there. And I thought, there is no way they didn't know. So I walked over, calm on the outside at least. Greg was out there with one of the contractors, holding a coffee and pointing at something on a blueprint. I waited until he noticed me and gave a nod. I told him the garage looked like it was coming over my driveway. He glanced at it and then back at me and gave this short, dismissive laugh like I'd said something mildly amusing. He told me the contractor had measured everything and they were fine. I asked if they'd had a survey done. He shrugged and said the builder handled all that. Then he took a sip of his coffee and added, almost as an afterthought, I mean, it's just a few feet. You can still get in and out, right? And that was the moment something shifted for me. Not the garage itself, not the overhang, that sentence. Him saying it like my property line was just a suggestion. Like access was good enough even if ownership wasn't being respected. I nodded slowly like I was still processing. Told him I'd double check on my end. He smiled like that settled it. Go for it. I walked back to my house, but I didn't go inside right away. I stood there in the driveway looking up at that roof line hanging over my space and thinking through every possible version of where this went from here. Scraped vehicles, blocked access, arguments dragging on for years. I realized something simple. If I didn't deal with this now, it was never going to get better on its own. So the next morning I made a call. Not to Greg, not to the contractor. I called a surveyor. And I thought as I hung up, if I'm wrong, I'll apologize, no problem. But if I'm right, this wasn't going to end quietly after all. The surveyor showed up 2 days later around noon, driving a dusty white truck with faded lettering on the side that looked like it had seen 100 property disputes before mine. His name was Dale, late 50s maybe, quiet and steady, The kind of man who doesn't waste words because he doesn't need to. He stepped out, looked around once, then at me and said, "Somebody built where they shouldn't have," like he already knew the answer. I gave a small shrug and told him that was what I was trying to figure out. He nodded, grabbed his equipment, and got to work. If you've never watched a proper land survey happen, it's not dramatic at first. It's slow, methodical, almost boring if you don't know what you're looking at. But every step felt like something tightening, a knot being pulled a little tighter with each measurement. Dale walked the perimeter, checked old markers, pulled up county records on his tablet, muttered numbers under his breath in a language only he fully understood. Every now and then he'd glance up at the garage, then back down at his instruments, and each time he did, I felt that quiet confirmation building. About an hour in, he stopped near the edge of my driveway, knelt down, and drove a bright red stake into the ground with a small hammer. The sound was sharp and deliberate, and somehow echoed more than it should have. Then he stood up and said, "You might want to walk with me." We moved together along the line, one red stake at a time, marking a boundary that was becoming more real and more undeniable with every step. When we reached the spot where their garage sat, Dale didn't say anything at first. He just pointed. The corner of that structure wasn't close to the property line. It wasn't touching it. It was over the line by about 4 feet. And the roof line, which extended further still, close to 5. I let out a slow breath, the kind you didn't realize you'd been holding. "So I'm not crazy." Dale shook his head. "No, sir, that's a clear encroachment." That word, clear. Not maybe, not debatable, not open to interpretation. Clear. I thanked him, paid him, and before he left, he handed me a printed report, along with a digital copy. Clean, official, and impossible to argue with. That evening, I took photos of everything. Every angle I could think of. The stakes, the measurements, the garage corner crossing the line like it didn't belong there. I even took a shot from inside my SUV, showing how tight the clearance had become. I printed everything out, and the next morning slipped the envelope into their mailbox. No note, no drama, just facts. And then I waited. 1 day passed. Nothing. 2 days. Still nothing. By the 3rd day, I knew exactly what kind of situation this was turning into. Not a misunderstanding, a decision. They had seen the evidence and were choosing to ignore it. So I walked over again. This time it took a while before the door opened. Greg stood there but didn't have the friendly smile anymore. His expression was flat, almost annoyed. I held up the papers and asked if he'd gotten them. He barely glanced at them, sighed like I was already asking too much, leaned against the doorframe and said, "Look, tearing down part of the garage isn't happening. It cost a lot of money." I kept my voice even. I told him it was on my property. He gave a small, dismissive shrug. "It's a few feet. You still got space." The same line again. I pointed toward the driveway and told him I couldn't get larger vehicles through anymore, that I could barely maneuver as it was. He glanced past me like he was humoring the idea for half a second, then said, "You'll figure it out." And there it was. Not just dismissal, but expectation. Like I was supposed to adapt to his mistake. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I said one word. "All right." No argument, no raised voice, just that. And walked away. Part of me wanted to escalate right then, call a lawyer, file something official, drag it into court. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Legal battles take time, months, sometimes years. And in the meantime, I'd still be dealing with that garage hanging over my driveway every single day. I didn't want a long fight. I wanted a solution. So I went digging. Property records, zoning regulations, access laws, anything that might apply. Nights turned into hours of reading through documents written to confuse people on purpose. But eventually something clicked. My driveway wasn't a shared access lane. It wasn't an easement for both properties. It was entirely on my land, fully mine, which meant I had complete control over how it was used. All of it. And that's when the idea came to me. Not all at once, slowly, piece by piece, until it formed into something simple, elegant, and completely unavoidable. If they wanted to treat my property line like a suggestion, I would remind them exactly where my land started and stopped. Not with paperwork, with steel. A few days later, I made another call, this time to a metalwork company across town. I explained what I needed: 2 steel posts, 1 heavy crossbar installed at the entrance of my driveway. Solid, permanent. The guy on the phone asked about height clearance. I paused for a second, picturing their garage overhang, the exact point where it dipped just a little too low over my property. Then I said, 7 feet. A brief silence on the other end, like he was doing the math. All right, he said, we can do that. We scheduled it for the following week. I didn't tell Greg, didn't warn him, didn't hint at it, because at that point I wasn't interested in another conversation where nothing changed. I was interested in results. The morning the crew showed up, I was already outside with coffee in hand, watching the truck pull in. Same feeling as before, but this time I wasn't the one being caught off guard. They got to work immediately, marking the entrance, digging holes on either side of the driveway, gravel and dirt and the sound of shovels hitting ground. It all felt strangely satisfying. It didn't take long for the Turners to notice. Their front door opened and both Greg and his wife stepped out, looking confused at first, then concerned. Greg walked over with quick steps, eyes moving from the workers to me. What's going on? I took a sip of my coffee, set the cup down on the hood of my car, and said as calmly as I could, installing a clearance bar. A what? A height restriction for vehicles entering my driveway. He frowned. Why? I met his eyes. To protect access to my garage. There was a pause, just long enough for it to start sinking in. Behind us, the workers lifted the steel crossbar into place, and as it rose, you could almost see the realization hit him. That slow shift from confusion to calculation, and then to something heavier. The kind of understanding that doesn't come with an apology, but with a dawning awareness that the rules have changed and he's no longer the one setting them. The crew kept working like Greg wasn't even there. Bolts tightening, metal settling into position with that deep final sound that says, this is not temporary. Greg took a step closer, looked up at the bar, then over at his garage, then back at me. 7 feet, he said, like he needed to hear it out loud. Right around there, I said, casual as discussing fence paint. That's low for some vehicles. Another pause, longer this time because now he was doing the math. His garage overhang, the part that crossed into my property, sat lower than that bar. Not by a huge margin, but enough. Enough that anything taller than a standard sedan, a truck, a van, even some SUVs, would have to think twice before coming anywhere near that angle. And the way his driveway lined up with the alley behind his house, the only clean turning path into that garage had always cut right across my driveway entrance. It always had. Without that extra space, the turn got tight. Now it wasn't just tight, it was blocked. Greg turned back to me, voice sharper. You can't just do this. I tilted my head slightly. It's my driveway. That's not the point. It kind of is, I said. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a small circle like he was searching for the right argument. You're making it impossible to use our garage. I didn't answer right away. I let that sentence sit there between us for a moment. Let him hear it himself. Then I said, interesting. He stopped pacing. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, that you built part of your garage over my property and now you're upset because you can't use it properly. His jaw tightened. We can still use it. Maybe, I said carefully. Behind us, my SUV rolled forward as one of the workers tested the clearance. Passed under the bar clean, no problem. Designed that way. Greg watched it, then looked back at his garage. And for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't have anything to say. The crew finished about 20 minutes later, packed their tools, gave me a nod, and drove off, leaving that black steel bar standing at the entrance of my driveway like a line drawn in permanent ink. Over the next few days, I didn't have to do much. I just watched. The first attempt came the very next morning. Greg backed his pickup down the alley, lined it up with the garage, then stopped. Sat there for a minute with the engine idling, staring at the angle. He tried once, slow and cautious, turning the wheel and inching forward. But the moment he approached the driveway entrance, it was obvious. The clearance bar forced him into a tighter path, and the overhang hung there like a warning he'd built himself. He backed up and tried again. Same result. Eventually, he parked on the street and went inside without saying a word. Later that week, a delivery van pulled up and didn't even attempt it. The driver stepped out, looked at the bar, looked at the garage entrance, shook his head, and carried the boxes by hand. After that, the garage became something else entirely. Not really a garage anymore, storage. I'd see the door open occasionally, boxes stacked inside, bikes leaned against the wall. A vehicle almost never. And when they did try, it was always small, always careful, always tense, like threading a needle that never needed to be there in the first place. 2 weeks passed like that. And then one evening, just as the sun was dropping behind the houses, there was a knock at my door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Greg stood there, but different this time. Not defeated exactly, but quieter, less certain, like a man who'd spent the last 14 days replaying every decision that had led to this moment. "Hey," he said. "Hey." A brief silence, the kind where both people know why they're there, but neither wants to go first. Then he cleared his throat. "Can we talk?" I stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind me. "Sure." He glanced toward the driveway, toward the bar, then back at me. "This situation," he said, "it's not working." I folded my arms loosely. "I noticed." He exhaled slowly. "Look, I get it. The survey, the property line. Maybe we should have handled that differently. Maybe." I didn't say it out loud, but I let it hang there between us. He continued. "But tearing down part of the garage, that's a big deal. It's expensive." I nodded once. "It is." Another pause. And then finally he asked the question I've been waiting for since the beginning of all this. What would it take to fix this? There it was. Not a demand, not a dismissal, a question. And I'd thought about that moment more than once. What I'd say if we ever got here. I didn't want to drag it out, didn't want to squeeze every last drop out of it. I just wanted my property respected. So I kept it simple. "You move the garage fully off my property," I said. "No overhang, no corner, nothing crossing the line." He stared at me for a moment, searching for something. Maybe a compromise, maybe a loophole. And when he didn't find one, he asked, "And then you take down the bar?" Straight, clean, fair. He looked past me at that black steel beam like it had suddenly become the most expensive piece of metal he'd ever seen. "That's it," I said. "That's it." Another long silence. I could almost hear the numbers running through his head. Cost of rebuilding, time, hassle, versus living indefinitely with a garage he couldn't properly use. Finally, he nodded. Slow, reluctant, but real. "All right," he said. "We'll fix it." And just like that, the fight was over. The actual work took a few more weeks. Contractors came back, sections were cut, adjusted, rebuilt. It wasn't pretty for a while. Half-finished beams, exposed framing, the kind of construction mess that makes you wince every time you look out the window. But eventually, the structure shifted back to where it should have been from the beginning, completely clear of my property line. When it was done, I called the same metalwork crew and they came back out, unbolted the crossbar, and lifted it away. Just like that, my driveway was open again. No drama, no ceremony, just space where there should have been space from the start. These days, every now and then I'll see Greg pull into that garage without any trouble. Clean turn, no hesitation. It works the way it was always supposed to. We're civil, not friends and probably never will be, but we nod. We keep things simple, boundaries, clear, visible, and respected. That's enough for me. But here's the part that still sticks with me when I think back on it. If I hadn't pushed back, if I just accepted those few feet, told myself it wasn't worth the trouble, what would it have been next time? 3 feet? 5? A fence? A shed? Something else creeping over the line until the line didn't mean anything at all? Some people might say I went too far, that I could have been more patient, more flexible, found a gentler way to handle it. Maybe. I honestly don't know. All I know is that respect doesn't usually show up on its own. Sometimes you have to build it. In this case, quite literally, out of steel. So here's what I want to know. What would you have done? Would you have taken the legal route and waited it out? Months of back and forth, lawyers, court dates, all of it. Or would you have done exactly what I did? And where do you draw the line between standing your ground and making things worse? Drop your answer in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think, and I'm genuinely curious where people land on this one. If you like this story, real situations, real consequences, and the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching a problem actually get solved, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Trust me, not all neighbor disputes end this cleanly. See you in the next one.